right, we're good.
Okay. So now we basically just want to terminate the test that he was running. So we'll just go here and we want to hit this guy here. Are you sure you want to stop the test? Yes. So, I mean, it's only a play button, but it is our start and stop. Right? Okay, so everything's done. So we can get him off the mask, and I'll have you just turn towards me. The best way I like to remove the mask, and this is just kind of personal preference, is just from the sides. So just taking the two sides off and allowing the mask to just get away like that. And this off. I just like to do it that way where I pull that off because I don't like things dangling and you run the risk of dropping it. So I like to make sure that I pull that off first. Perfect. Set this guy here. And yeah, we can go ahead. You can go ahead and pull that guy off. Okay, so now we ran our test. We want to now import the data that we just collected onto the computer into the Omnia software. So first thing we're going to do is plug it in. And like I showed you guys before, it's labeled, power supply, USB, and then the extra heart rate. So it's just going to go right in the center. That. Okay, so now we are going to just import our test. So we'll just go into the database, and it's a little misleading because it says import right here, but we're not importing, we're downloading. So we're gonna hit the download button. And first thing we're gonna do is read data. And there's our test. So what's gonna happen is we're gonna click it, and it's gonna, so remember how I told you before it'll recognize if it's a duplicate or not? Right when I clicked that, it would have recognized that that John's already in the database, so it would give us the option to add to. So we'd add the test to his already created subject card. But in this case, he's a new subject, so we're just going to hit new subject, and it's going to create the card and import the visit and all the data.
And all this can be done via USB or Bluetooth?
No, it can't be done via Bluetooth.
Okay.
It has to be done via USB. Yeah, the Bluetooth is just to stream data. Yeah. Okay, so we're done there. We'll just close it, and now John's test is sitting right here. So let's go ahead and take a look. There we go. So let's get...
So like on the cork, they're like, make sure you save it, save the raw data before you do anything else. Is it kind of a similar with this?
Yeah, so it is in raw data form right now.
Yeah.
And so we obviously have a lot of noise and everything, so we'd want to do our averaging like now, so the data looks a little bit smoother. But essentially once we import, we get the options to just look at the kind of the final summary. We haven't done any interpretation yet. And then we have the dashboard, which shows us all the raw data and a couple graphs. You can switch between like Wasserman's different editions of his 9-panel plots. And then you have like the cardio clinical, for example, that gives you VEV, VO2 slope, and it gives you kind of like more of these clinical parameters. And then like the thresholds, which you'd be using more so with your sport-specific populations to look at ventilatory thresholds and things like that. And And then we have just like our QC data, which is just kind of like more quality control stuff, like telling us what the environment is doing, what the sensors were doing, and things like that. And then the last thing is under analysis, this essentially lets you look at VO2 slow component. Right now, it's a little bit wonky because like you could never really look at slow component, fast component, like epoch in a VO2 test. It would have to be in a staged test. Just because you have a continual ramp to peak where to look at slow component and fast component, you need to have plateaus in your data.
Yeah.
So not very useful with, I mean, people don't do this kind of testing with a K5. So not a whole lot of application for it, even though if you did run the right protocol, you could look at it. But like the algorithm and stuff, there's no like auto detect for the slow component. You'd still have to export it manually and do everything manually. So like this part of the software, not really a whole lot of application there. So if we want to just go back to results, this is where we're going to do our data averaging. So the first thing we're going to do is hit edit.
So officially though, you have not exported the raw data to an Excel spreadsheet?
Not yet, no.
So, okay.
I can do that right now.
Yeah, because it, like in the part tutorial, I thought they're like, immediately export your raw data before you filter it.
I think what was meant by that is you want to save it in breath-by-breath mode before you do any edit and filtering. That way you can always restore it back to the raw breath-by-breath mode after you've done anything to it.
Okay.
Yeah. So like, I'll just hit cancel here. If I wanted to export it immediately, you just hit export. You have the option to export directly to Excel to get all the raw data. The XML file is literally just a blank file that can only be read by Omnia. So like your only reason for that is like, say you had Omnia on another computer and you wanted to put that XML file on a USB and take it there and then import it, and then you can do your same analysis. But it sounds like mostly the Excel is where you guys are going to be doing your data manipulation. So you just hit Excel, hit OK. It's going to name it, time or date stamp it, and we'll hit save. And then it's going to ask us if we want to open the file immediately, and we'll just hit yes.
Can Omnia read Excel files?
It can, but it requires a specific license to do it. It's like called our competitive data import, and the reason for it is because the only people who ever want to do that is they're like, oh, I have a Parvo cart and I want all my data to go into Omnia, so like we charge for that.
Got it.
But it is possible.
Sure. I was just curious.
So yeah, just kind of like you would get from any other metabolic cart, it's just all your physiological parameters moving to the right, and we just have our demographic card, visit card, all that information, ambient temperature, pressure, all that stuff situated there on the left. And so pretty straightforward. This would just be in all raw breath-by-breath mode. So we have that file. If we wanted to come in and edit and do like a averaging, we could average it, save it, and then export it again. So we could go edit, and we would come here and go edit and filter. And so we have a few different methods for editing and filtering. So we have smoothing, which allows you to smooth it by steps. So basically each one of these breaths is a step. Or you could do a rolling time average, which is a 30-second average, but it drops the initial 10 seconds and constantly refreshes that. Or just a time average, which allows you to just average it by time. I prefer the rolling time average just because it's a little bit more efficient than just the regular time average, because it's constantly updating every 10 seconds. And so, you know, that's pretty much that, and you can just accept it and then do your export again. But so for example, if I accepted it, data has been edited, results will be recalculated, would you like to save the changes? Yes. We originally saved the test in a raw form, so we'll always be able to restore. So like if we go back, we can just go restore raw data. Yes, and it just restored. And so you can also like let me just edit it again.
And that's what we can do over there too.
Rolling time average, save that. And so with the K5, if you didn't have a protocol set, like before you start the test in the on the computer, you can actually select a protocol. So say like somebody is going to do like a running protocol or like some sort of like staged thing on like an ergometer, or you're mimicking a protocol outside. You couldn't mimic the protocol just running it through the K5. You would have to do it through here, because before you start the test, they'll ask you, are you syncing to a bike or an ergometer, and what protocol are you running? You would select no, I'm not syncing to anything, but you would...
And I'm following a protocol.
I'm following a protocol, so that way it's telling the system, okay, this time period is rest, this time period is exercise, this time period is recovery. And the importance of that is because when you come to an end of an exercise test and you come into recovery, your RQ values and things like that go through the roof. So if you're trying to look and establish thresholds, you need to tell the system that's post-exercise RQ values. Because then when it starts calculating the V-slope, it's going to start looping back on itself because of the way that it calculates. So the graph's going to look all funky. And so like, say we ran this test, he didn't follow any protocol, but we did 2 stages. So say just for example, we knew those stages, they were part of some quality control protocol. We could just come right here and we could go edit exercise, and we would just move these bars and say exercise didn't start until here and it ended here. So then
that will chunk it versus dropping markers is just helpful for you when you're coming back later to add these parameters.
Exactly.
Calculation.
So when we first looked at his thresholds, V-slope started coming back on itself. When you do this, it's not going to do that anymore, because it's going to essentially, right where exercise stopped, it's going to chop the data. Because anyways, with the V-slope method, you can only look at first threshold anyway, so you don't even care about all that data above that, above and beyond that, essentially. So this is just a way to tell the system, this is where exercise stopped, this is where it started, so then when you're going to do your manipulation, even in your Excel export, your column all the way to the right is going to be blocked out. It's going to say this was rest, this was exercise, this was recovery.
So what if... Because then, if there's a way to just manually repair that gap, then we don't have to rerun a subject.
Right. So right here, you can choose the steps that look funky, and you just delete them out. Like, that's pretty much it, because it sounds like you guys are going to be exporting everything. So just making sure that you save it, export it as raw, and then if you want to filter it, come back in, filter it, export it again, and then you have your raw Excel and your 30-second average Excel. Just so like you don't have to manually do any averaging in Excel on its own, you can have the two.
So the difference between the rolling time average and just the time average, you said like, I want to average over the last 2 minutes of this trial. Is that the time versus rolling is just continually?
Rolling is, it's just updating the 30-second average every 10 seconds. So essentially, like, it really is actually like a 20-second average, because there's that 10-second part that's constantly updating. And that just prevents there from being too much washout of any like discrepancies in any measurements.
Okay. Could you show the other time averaging, the other averaging?
Yeah, they're all raw, and do your own manipulation in Excel, because you're not going to be able to tell the software how to get around that. Yeah. But yeah, all your filtering will just be right here.
Can you just show the time? Click on the time average. I'm just curious what the time average was.
Yes.
and then you set.
So
this,
it's going to automatically go 30, but you
Okay.
can set it to be whatever you want.
And this is just setting that window for the rolling.
This is setting the window for only the time average.
Oh, okay,
the
gotcha.
rolling can't be
It's
changed.
always gonna be
it's
that.
always going to be 30, updated every 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like you could set this one to 20, and it's going to be more similar to the rolling time average. Because every 10, the other one it updates, right? So even though it'll still be kind of different, you might not overlap perfectly, but it's kind of like that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll just go ahead and hit accept. Yes. Save. This one's empty right here because that one was, these are all parameters from an ergometer, which
Oh,
we
which
weren't
we
plugged
don't have.
into, so there wasn't anything there. Okay, so we could just hit close, and we're back to the database. We're going to get back one more time, back into the main component of the software. Any questions on any of that?
I actually do have a question.
Uh-huh.
Oh, so I was going to ask, like, how much storage is on the device, and like, how do you have to clear it? Is it overwrite?
Yeah,
How
I
do you
was.
manage that?
Yeah, that was actually. I'm glad you brought that up because it's a good time to cover that. It stores 16,000 breaths. So really, what that looks like is, I believe their spec on it was like 24 hours of continuous resting data, or it was. I want to say it was about 5 or 6 hours of continuous VO2 max data. So
A lot.
yeah. So you shouldn't.
So like one trial.
Yeah, like, you know.
Yeah. But the problem is if you don't wipe the device clean, it's not going to overwrite old data. It's just going to stop saving data. So like you could be running a test and looking at it through here and it looks all good.
It was never stored.
But it'll never store. So actually, if you're running it through the computer, you'd be fine up until that point, and then it would just cut off. And then you would know, like, oh shoot, like there's no more memory left. But if you were just running through that, you'd never know, and you'd just be hanging out like, okay, sweet, I'm getting all this data, and then come back and you're like, oh, no data.
Yeah.
So real quickly, let's take a look at that.
Oh,
So-
and so like the hospital or the university is really fussy about any personal health information getting stored on a laptop.
Of course.
So if I say it's going to be stored here and then swiped, it's going to drop onto the laptop to be configured and then taken onto a secure USB and not stored on this. Is that correct?
That is correct, but I believe in terms of like HIPAA guidelines and things like that, this is a standalone.
Yeah,
it's
not in the cloud.
It's not networked, and it's
Okay.
password protected. So
Okay,
like
so we're
no
not-
one could really ever say anything to you about it because it's completely compliant with HIPAA in that way.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so we are going to come into the utility tile. So back from the home screen, utility, we're going to click on database, and it says erase database or database status. We're going to just look at the status real quick. Archive test, it gives us one test and the archive size 59K. If I go back one, I gotta go to utility again, back to database. I'm just gonna erase the database, and that's it. And it's clean and clear. So, yeah, so we already imported the test over here. We exported our Excel file. Don't need to worry about it being stored here anymore. So it's gone. So, like I said before, if we ran a test through the K5 again, we're not going to be able to pull up his subject card. We'd have to re-enter it. So that's why you got to be careful with entering it appropriately, so that when you go to import, it recognizes it's a dupe and it sticks them together instead of creating two separate subject cards. Because then all of a sudden you're like finding the discrepancy and then exporting one test and then re-importing it, and it's just kind of like a waste of time.
Is it even fussy with capitalization?
Yeah, so you gotta I just say keep everything all capital all the time.
Got it.
Yeah. Okay, so the database is deleted. now we wanted to run a test looking at the data in real time, right? Did we have any other questions regarding importing data or anything on the system?
I have one for the SD card. So I've been running it separate without using anything on my laptop, and then just exporting to an SD. And I had this weird bug occur where I'd get like 10 or 11 files, and then sometimes it wouldn't save one, or like it would say save, and then I'd go to like scroll through and I couldn't find it for some reason.
Yeah, so you can use the SD card to save tests, but I have heard of that happening before. And actually, if you were to ask anybody internally at COSMED, they would say not to use the SD card for that purpose.
Okay.
We use the SD card to update the firmware. That's how we update that guy. So like even though you can save data to SD cards like that, we have run into those issues before, and it's a firmware thing that hasn't really been addressed, I don't think.
Okay.
So the information that I've gathered from engineers is just to tell people to do the data export and erase everything that way after each use, because we've had issues with the SD card.
Yeah. Because if I just started clearing it after each use, and then it's been fine. But
Yeah.
it seemed like some number of files, and it's not near the size limit or anything. So firmware makes sense.
Yeah, so it's just like something that I don't think that they saw as being very important. They're like, they didn't intend for it to be used for that purpose originally. It just ended up being that you kind of could.
Yeah, it's just really convenient to use it that way.
Yeah, it is for sure. I would have always thought to use it that way as well, but that's not really the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, did you have a question?
I did. Yeah, so you mentioned like adding markers
Yes.
to denote timestamps during data collection.
Yes.
Is that done? How is that done during data collection? Like,
You have to be streaming the data through the computer.
Okay,
Yeah.
Add markers.
yeah.
There's a button on the thing too.
Is there?
Yeah, that's how I do it.
I didn't
So
even
I
know
do it
that.
all at once.
I didn't even know that.
So when you're running, it's this button right here. It says mark on the bottom,
Oh, okay.
and you click it once, and then the next time they take a breath, it'll pop up with like a little yellow text, and it says marker. But sometimes you gotta
Do you
be
get to
careful.
label it?
No.
Oh.
It just puts a 1 or a 0 in the one text column with each breath samples. So like when I'm doing mine, I like do one start, do one stop.
Yeah, yeah. And you denote. Okay, marker 1 is when we started this condition, or
Yeah, usually if I just assume I always hit it unless I like have to restart a condition, and I'll like third, delete third, whatever.
gotcha.
I see.
Yeah, I think maybe I've never done it like that before, because in the software you can label markers.
Yeah, like we know
Yeah.
how to label them on the cart.
Yeah, and like so it'll be the same as it is over there, and when it exports to Excel, you'll have marker columns, and then whatever you typed in for the marker will
Yeah.
be there. Yeah. So like through the software, there's two different ways to drop markers. There's an arterial blood gas marker, which just says you can't put any value. It just says we took an arterial blood gas measure, or you just drop a standard marker that you can label whatever you want. You can say subject, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So,
Okay.
but I didn't know that, so that's cool.
Well, we just keep measuring, and then as each aspect of the protocol is changing, whether it's the standing or the treadmill or the walking, and we just keep, and then they're recorded while they're just resting in between the running and the walking. We just keep going, and add all these markers.
Yeah, I personally wouldn't do it that way.
Okay.
I just don't like the data to have all the markers in it, because if you're like looking at the raw file, it's going to drop all these markers on there. And then if you're looking at it in Excel, you have to scroll all the way over to get where all those markers are anyway.
Okay.
So I would typically just record the markers on the side, and then make sure that I know where exercise started and ended. Personally, the only markers I've ever used is for arterial blood gas measures, so that's why I've never used the feature to that full extent in that way.
So then getting the timings synced up, if you're going to go no markers route, it's not from when you first press play necessarily, right? It's 2 minutes after that?
No, that's so if you press play, it starts recording immediately. So from as soon as you press play, you're good to
That's
go.
good to go.
But if you let it run the full 2 minutes, you just gotta like be watching it for when it gets to 2 minutes and refreshes, you hit your timer or whatever.
So that's a new 0.
That's your only 0.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
so 2 minutes it's on and then it refreshes.
Yeah,
and
none
then
of
it
that
starts.
initial 2 minute data
It's
is going to show up
recorded.
anywhere. It's not
Okay.
recorded.
I'm
Yeah.
glad you said that because that did not sink in my head the first time around.
Yeah, that would be a little confusing. Because
Yeah.
essentially that's not your rest phase, that's your washout phase.
Exactly.
washout,
And
yes,
you're
that's-
not saving any data from that.
No.
Yes, you have a 2-minute offset on your
Offset,
time.
yeah,
So
no.
then maybe it is best to, if you were going to go any markers and didn't want to wait the whole 2 minutes, you could just press play to start, you'd be in washout phase,
Mhm.
and then sometime prior to 2 minutes, do that. You can press it again to like start the actual data collection, right?
Yeah, you
Yeah,
can do
and
it.
that's what I would just start my timers.
Yeah.
That's another way to do it.
Okay, so do we want to set up one more time so we can watch data in real time? Yeah.